The inspection cutter opened the old canvas with one quick pull, and the sound cut through the security line like a warning. Folded clothes slipped out, a shaving kit hit the floor, the worn leather strap dropped across the dirty tile. Officer Todd Miller looked down at the ruined bag and gave a satisfied little smile. "You're done flying today, pal," he said. The man in the faded hoodie did not answer. He only stared at the torn canvas, at the brass buckles, and at the family history now lying open for strangers to see. Todd thought the silence meant fear. He thought the room belonged to him. What he did not know was that the quiet man he had chosen to embarrass could make the entire airport stop and pay attention with one calm call. 4 hours earlier, before the first boarding call echoed across the terminal, Marcus Vance stood alone inside a corner office in Washington, District of Columbia. The room smelled faintly of leather, lemon polish, and strong coffee that had gone cold. Heavy oak shelves lined the walls. A wide mahogany desk sat near the windows. On the wall behind it, the seal of the Department of Homeland Security rested under a single warm lamp. Marcus was 58 years old, broad-shouldered, steady-eyed, and quiet in a way that made people lower their voices around him. He had taken the oath of office 3 days earlier. Since then, the title had followed him everywhere. Mr. Secretary, cabinet member, senior official. The words were impressive, but they were also heavy. They carried every airport line, every border crossing, every frightened traveler, and every officer who believed a badge gave him permission to forget basic decency. A dark suit hung on the back of his chair. A white shirt waited beneath it, crisp and perfect. A blue tie lay folded over the armrest. Marcus looked at them for a moment, then turned away. Today, he wore a faded gray hoodie with a cracked university logo on the chest. The elbows were thin. His jeans had frayed hems. His old athletic shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor. He did not look like a man who could sign an order that reached every major airport in the country. He looked like someone heading out early to help a neighbor move furniture. On the leather sofa rested an old olive green duffel bag. The canvas had gone soft with age. The corners were reinforced with dark brown leather, scuffed and scarred from decades of use. The brass zipper caught near the end, like it always did. Marcus held the bag with both hands before zipping it shut. He did not hurry. That bag had belonged to his father. His father had carried it through 2 military tours, then carried it home, then kept it in the hall closet for the rest of his life. After the funeral, Marcus had found it folded under a wool coat, smelling faintly of dust, metal, and old rain. Now it held simple things: a clean shirt, a small shaving kit, a paperback book, a laptop, a secure phone, and one photograph of his father standing beside a transport plane, young and tired and smiling anyway. His father, Raymond Vance, had never been the kind of man who spoke about bravery as if it belonged in speeches. He spoke about shoes being tied, promises being kept, and people being treated right, even when nobody was looking. When Marcus was a boy, that old duffel had sat near the back door every winter, packed with blankets, canned food, and a little cash his father quietly gave to men from his old unit who had fallen on hard times. Raymond never called it charity. He called it remembering where you came from. Marcus had learned early that service did not begin when a person put on a uniform, and it did not end when he took it off. His father had carried that belief through good years and hard years. He had opened doors for strangers. He had corrected people gently when they spoke down to waitresses. He had once driven 3 hours to help a former soldier who could not get his benefits paperwork sorted out, then came home and acted like he had only run an errand. After Raymond died, Marcus found a folded note tucked inside the side pocket of the duffel. It said, "Power is only clean when it protects people who cannot repay you." Marcus had kept that note in his desk for years. That morning, before he left the office, he placed it inside the bag beside the photograph. He did not know why. Maybe he wanted his father with him. Maybe he already sensed the day would ask him to remember what the title on the wall could not teach. A stack of morning folders waited on the desk. Threat assessments, transportation reports, complaints from field offices, civil rights reviews, internal audits. Marcus had read enough of them to know what numbers could hide. Charts could show patterns. Spreadsheets could prove failures. But paper could not show the tone in an officer's voice when he decided a person did not matter. His phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up and called his chief of staff. "Cancel the motorcade," Marcus said. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, the vehicles are already downstairs." "Cancel them. The press pool is waiting at the airport. They can wait somewhere else." Your security detail is staged. Stand them down. Another pause. Sir, with respect, that's not recommended. Marcus looked at the old duffel bag. I'm flying commercial today. No advanced team, no greeting line, no airport director, no special lane. His chief of staff lowered his voice. You want to go through regular screening. I want to go through the way everyone else does. Sir, may I ask why? Because I don't need another polished tour. I need the truth. He ended the call before anyone could argue further. The audits had been sitting on his desk since his first morning in office. John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport had produced the highest rate of passenger treatment complaints in the country. The language in the files was careful, but the meaning was not. Unequal screening, disrespectful conduct, retaliation against passengers who asked questions, supervisors ignoring reports, officers using policy as a shield for ego. Marcus had spent enough years in government to know how quickly people cleaned up when important visitors were expected. A suit bought smiles. A title bought apologies. A motorcade bought a version of reality that ordinary people never got to experience. A faded hoodie, on the other hand, might buy honesty. He slung the duffel strap over his shoulder, locked the office, and walked out alone. The hallway was nearly empty. The security team had already disappeared on his orders. Downstairs, a row of black government vehicles waited along the curb. Marcus passed them without slowing down and crossed the garage to an older sedan parked in the corner. He unlocked it himself, placed the duffel on the passenger seat, and started the engine. The city was still half asleep when he merged onto the highway. The sky above Washington was dark blue at the edges. Traffic lights blinked over quiet streets. Marcus drove north with both hands on the wheel. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call anyone. He let the silence settle around him because he knew the day ahead would be loud enough. During the drive, Marcus thought about the complaints he had read the night before. He thought about how neatly pain can be filed. A passenger says an officer mocked her accent, and the report calls it a communication issue. A father says his teenage son was treated like a suspect for asking why his bag was opened, and the report calls it passenger non-compliance. A young employee says a supervisor punishes anyone who challenges him, and the report says leadership tension. Those words were too clean. They made ugly things sound administrative. Marcus had spent most of his career reading between lines that were written to protect institutions from embarrassment. He knew the danger of language that makes people disappear. Today, he wanted the raw version. No reception committee, no conference room, no airport manager standing beside a coffee tray saying they took all concerns seriously. He wanted the ordinary morning, with all its rough edges left in place. By the time the highway widened near New York, the sun had climbed above the gray line of buildings. Traffic thickened. Horns started. Commuters leaned over steering wheels. Planes crossed the sky in slow silver arcs. Marcus watched one descend toward Queens and felt the old familiar pull of airports. They were places of promise and pressure. People came to them carrying weddings, funerals, interviews, reunions, vacations, emergencies, dreams, and last chances. A security checkpoint could be the first face of the country for someone arriving, or the last human gate before someone went home. Marcus did not think of that as poetry. To him, it was simply the job. By mid-morning, Terminal 4 at John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport was already wide awake and restless. The building hummed with rolling suitcases, public announcements, coffee machines, crying children, and people who were one delay away from losing patience. Metallic voices called out boarding changes. Shoes tapped against terrazzo floors. Plastic bins slammed onto metal rollers again and again. The air carried the sharp smell of floor cleaner, mixed with perfume, breakfast sandwiches, and stress. Marcus stepped through the sliding glass doors and paused just inside. He did not look around like a tourist. He watched the flow of people, families, students, business travelers, elderly couples, airport workers moving fast with radios on their shoulders, a young mother balancing a stroller, a backpack, and a child who had decided the floor was the only place he wanted to sit. A man in a suit cut between two passengers and never looked back. A college student held her passport in both hands as if it might vanish. Marcus adjusted the duffel on his shoulder and walked toward security. The closer he got, the more the airport separated people into quiet categories. Travelers with premium status moved through short lanes with clean carpet and calm agents. Everyone else joined the long, twisting line that looped behind metal barriers. Marcus chose the regular line. He wanted the slow part, the tired part, the part where ordinary people had to swallow inconvenience with a polite smile because arguing only made things worse. A businessman brushed Marcus's shoulder while passing. He glanced at the hoodie, then at the old bag, and looked away as if Marcus had become part of the furniture. Marcus noticed. He always noticed, but he said nothing. The regular line crawled forward. A child asked if they were almost there. A father said yes, though everyone knew they were not. An elderly woman ahead of Marcus opened and closed her purse 3 times, checking for her boarding pass. A young man with headphones kept shifting from one foot to the other. Nobody looked relaxed. At airports, even innocent people carried themselves like they might be accused of something. There was a quiet map of worry on every face in the line. Marcus had spent years watching rooms, and he could read the small signals. The woman ahead of him kept touching her passport because she had probably heard too many stories about documents being questioned. The young man with the headphones was not ignoring the world. He was trying to hold himself together. The father with the tired child kept smiling too hard, the way parents do when they are one public meltdown away from crying themselves. The business travelers acted irritated, but even they were performing confidence in a place where a single missed instruction could create a problem. A security line is one of the few places where everyone is asked to surrender something at the same time. Shoes, belts, bags, privacy, control. Most people accept it because safety matters. Marcus accepted it too, but he also knew that trust is fragile in moments of surrender. The person giving the instruction has to remember that the traveler obeying it is still a person, not a package moving down a belt. Lane 4 did not feel like that. Lane 4 felt tense before Todd even spoke. The bins moved faster than the people. Travelers leaned over tables, rushing to please him. No one asked questions unless they absolutely had to. The officers in neighboring lanes seemed to know when to look away. That was the first sign of a bad culture, not the loud bully. The people around him who had learned his rhythm and adjusted themselves around his cruelty. At the front of Lane 4 stood Officer Todd Miller. Todd was 42, thick around the middle, with a receding hairline and a uniform shirt stretched tight across his stomach. His Transportation Security Administration badge sat high on his chest, polished and visible. Sunglasses hung from his collar even though he was indoors. His voice carried too far. He moved like a man who enjoyed making people wait for permission. Beside him, at the screening monitor, stood Sarah Jenkins. She was 22, new enough that her uniform still looked carefully pressed. A silver rookie pin sat straight on her lapel. Her hair was tied back tight, but a few strands had already escaped. She looked tired in a way Marcus recognized. Not lazy, not careless, just under pressure and trying not to show it. Sarah Jenkins had been working that lane for only 7 weeks. She still remembered the first day she put on the uniform. Her mother had taken a picture of her near the apartment door, proud enough to cry and trying not to. Sarah had told herself the job would be steady, honest, and important. She believed in public service. She believed airports needed rules. She believed that keeping people safe could be done without making them feel small. Todd had started testing that belief almost immediately. At first, it was little comments. Don't be soft, rookie. Don't smile too much. Don't let passengers think you're their friend. Then it became warnings. Don't correct senior officers. Don't make notes unless I tell you. Don't ask why a passenger was sent to secondary. Sarah had learned that Todd's favorite word was control. He used it the way other people used please. She had thought about reporting him. She had opened the complaint form twice on the employee portal, then closed it both times. The form asked for dates, details, witnesses, and supervisor names. Todd was the supervisor. The witnesses were people who still had to work beside him. Her rent was due on the 1st. Her loan payment hit on the 15th. Her younger brother sometimes needed help buying textbooks. Courage felt different, when courage might cost more than you had. Still, the elderly woman's face got to her. It was not just the bottle. It was the way shame spread across the woman's cheeks when Todd made her seem foolish. Sarah saw her own grandmother in that moment, standing in a place where language moved too fast and authority sounded angry. That was why she spoke up. Not loudly, not perfectly, but enough to let the woman know at least one person in uniform had seen her. An elderly woman with a thick accent stepped forward holding a clear plastic bag of toiletries. Todd snatched it from her hand before she had fully offered it. What's all this, ma'am? You packed this yourself? The woman nodded quickly. Yes, I pack. Todd lifted a small bottle and squinted at it, as though it had personally offended him. You know there are rules, right? You don't just bring whatever you want through my checkpoint. She pointed to the label. Small. It is small. Todd turned the bottle over slowly. The line behind her went silent in that familiar airport way, where everyone pretends not to watch while watching everything. Sarah leaned closer to the monitor, then to Todd. Her voice was careful. Todd, that bottle looks under the limit. We can let that one through. Todd turned his head toward her, slowly. Sarah's face changed before he spoke. Are you the senior officer here, Jenkins? No, sir. Then don't correct me in front of passengers. I wasn't trying to. Do you want to write up during probation? Her mouth closed. She looked at the elderly woman, then down at the floor. No, sir. Todd dropped the bottle into the gray disposal bin. It hit the bottom with a heavy thud. The elderly woman flinched. She looked embarrassed, confused, and close to tears. The passengers noticed Sarah too. A college student near the front of the line looked at her with silent gratitude. A man holding a garment bag gave the smallest nod, then quickly looked away when Todd turned. These were tiny things, almost invisible, but they mattered. In a room ruled by fear, even a glance can say, I saw that. I know that was wrong. Marcus noticed all of it. He noticed the way Todd saved his loudest insults for people least likely to answer. He noticed the way the line moved not with efficiency, but with nervous obedience. He noticed the older officer 2 lanes down, who glanced over during the elderly woman's exchange, then suddenly became fascinated by a stack of bins. Marcus did not blame every person in that area equally, but he understood that systems rot when good people learn to survive by shrinking. Marcus watched without moving. He memorized Todd's badge number. He noted the lane. He noted the time. He noted the way the other officers nearby looked busy at exactly the wrong moment. Most failures in a system did not happen because nobody saw. They happened because people saw, then decided seeing was inconvenient. The line moved. Marcus stepped closer. Todd had started looking for him before Marcus reached the table. The old duffel drew his attention first, then the hoodie, then the shoes. Todd's eyes did a quick, ugly math and came up with the answer he wanted. This man was not important. This man could be pushed. Marcus placed the duffel gently into a gray bin. The brass buckles touched the plastic with a soft clink. He took off his shoes, placed his laptop in a separate tray, and emptied his pockets without being asked twice. Todd shoved the bin back toward him. The plastic edge knocked against Marcus's hand. Hoodie off, Todd said. Pockets empty. And don't give me attitude. Marcus looked at him calmly. I haven't given you any. Todd smiled. That made it worse. Step aside for secondary screening. Sarah glanced over. The line behind Marcus shifted with impatience. Marcus nodded once and moved to the small glass enclosure near the end of the lane. The floor had yellow footprints printed on it. He stood on them and waited. His hands rested at his sides. He did not ask why. He did not complain. He did not perform innocence for the crowd. That patience bothered Todd more than an argument would have. He walked over slowly, making the distance feel like a stage. His boots hit the floor with unnecessary force. He stood too close to Marcus and looked him up and down. You know, Todd said loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear, we get all kinds in here. People think they can walk into a federal checkpoint dressed however they want, carrying whatever they found in a basement. A few people turned their heads. Most looked away. Marcus kept his voice even. I'm here for my flight. Todd leaned closer. Are you? Yes. You have a valid boarding pass. Yes. Identification. Yes. Todd gave a little laugh. That's amazing, because you sure don't look like a man headed to a business meeting. Marcus said nothing. Todd tried to enjoy the silence. Silence gave him room to fill the air with his own importance. You people love testing rules, Todd said. Then when we do our jobs, you act offended. Sarah's eyes flicked up from the monitor. She knew that tone. Everyone who worked with Todd knew that tone. Marcus looked directly at him. You should continue the screening. That simple sentence landed badly, maybe because Marcus did not sound afraid when he said it. Todd's smile disappeared. Excuse me. I said you should continue the screening. Todd stepped back and reached for the laptop tray. He lifted it with one hand as if the machine were a dirty plate. Then he let the tray drop hard onto the metal table. The laptop bounced against the edge and scraped across the surface with a harsh, metallic sound. Several passengers jumped. Sarah took a step forward. Todd, careful. That's passenger property. Todd turned on her so quickly she stopped where she was. You want to run this lane? Number? Then stay at your station. Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm just saying we have handling standards. Todd lowered his voice, but not enough. You're on probation. You need this job. Think carefully before you keep talking. Sarah looked down. She hated herself for it, but she looked down. Marcus saw her hands shaking. He saw her fear. He also saw the first small act of courage she had tried to offer. Courage did not always enter a room loudly. Sometimes it was a 22-year-old rookie saying one careful sentence while her paycheck hung over a cliff. Todd turned back to Marcus and shoved the laptop aside. The device was dented now, but Marcus still did not react. That disappointed Todd, so he reached for the old duffel. Marcus's eyes changed slightly, only slightly. Todd noticed and smiled. Well, well, he said, this is the special item. He pinched the canvas between two fingers and lifted the bag out of the bin like it offended him. The leather base hung heavy. The brass buckles swung once. What is this thing? Todd wrinkled his nose. You carry your whole life in here. Marcus kept his voice low. Please handle that bag carefully. It belonged to my father. Todd looked at the bag, then at Marcus. Your father? Yes, he served in the armed forces. For 1 second, even Todd seemed to understand the line in front of him. The crowd understood it too. An old military bag carries a kind of meaning. People recognize before they can explain it. The faded canvas, the worn leather, the way Marcus watched it. Then Todd chose wrong. He dropped the duffel onto the stainless steel table. The buckles slammed against the metal. Lots of people say things, Todd said. Doesn't make the bag special. Marcus took one slow step forward. I'm asking you respectfully to stop treating my property that way. Todd looked pleased. There it was, not anger exactly, but a tender place, a place he could press. He opened the duffel without permission and began pulling things out. A folded shirt, another shirt, a small shaving kit, a paperback book. He tossed them onto the table and floor with careless flicks of his wrist. The line behind Marcus had gone quiet. A teenage boy raised his phone, then lowered it when his mother touched his arm. A business traveler watched over his coffee cup. A young father pulled his daughter a little closer. Sarah's face had gone pale. Todd kept digging until his hand closed around the leather strap near the side seam. He tugged hard. The old stitching resisted. Marcus said, "Stop." It was the first time his voice carried real weight. Todd looked up, not because he was frightened, because he was pleased. Or what? Marcus held his gaze. Continue the screening properly. Todd's cheeks reddened. He reached into his pocket and took out a small utility cutter used for opening sealed inspection boxes. Sarah's eyes widened. Todd, she said, you don't need that. He did not look at her. I decide what I need. Marcus's voice remained steady. Do not cut that bag. Todd opened the blade. The sound was small, a click, but half the lane heard it. He pressed the blade against the old canvas and pulled. The fabric split with a rough, tearing sound that seemed far louder than it should have been. Clothes slid free. The shaving kit hit the floor. The paperback opened face down. The old leather strap fell loose and useless. The bag that had survived war, travel, closets, grief, and time was now open across a dirty airport floor. The moment the blade opened the canvas, Sarah felt something inside her drop. It was not just rule-breaking anymore. It was not impatience, not poor tone, not a supervisor being rough because the line was busy. It was personal. Todd had listened to Marcus explain the meaning of the bag, then destroyed it because the meaning had given him power over the man. Sarah understood that kind of cruelty in a way that made her stomach turn. It was not a mistake. It was a message. A woman near the barrier whispered, he told him it was his father's. Her husband put a hand on her shoulder. A teenager kept recording, his phone shaking slightly. The businessman who had bumped Marcus earlier stood perfectly still now, shame and surprise mixing across his face. He had dismissed Marcus with a glance that morning. Todd had taken that same dismissal and turned it into an act everyone could see. The difference was degree, not direction, and the businessman seemed to feel it. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Todd closed the cutter and slipped it back into his pocket. He looked proud of himself. You're done flying today, pal. Marcus looked down at the torn canvas, then at the photograph of his father, which had slipped halfway out of the side pocket. He did not kneel. He did not grab for it. He knew if he moved too quickly, Todd would call it aggression. So he stood still and let the room see exactly what had happened. Todd hated that stillness. It did not give him the argument he wanted. He kicked a folded shirt lightly with the toe of his boot, as if searching for contraband. Then he spotted the secure phone. It was matte black, thick, heavy, and built for secure government communication. It had reinforced edges and a short antenna. It did not look like a normal smartphone because it was not one. Todd picked it up and held it in the air. "What's this?" Marcus said, "That is government property." Todd laughed. "Government property, sure." Sarah leaned forward. "Todd, it looks like a secure communication device. We should call a supervisor before you make a claim about it." Todd whipped his head toward her. "I said back off." Sarah froze again, but this time she did not fully retreat. Her eyes moved from the phone to Marcus. Something about his calm had started to bother her in a different way. He was not acting like a man caught doing something wrong. He was acting like a man waiting for a report to finish writing itself. Todd lifted the phone higher for the crowd to see. "We have an unmarked electronic device in the possession of an uncooperative passenger." People stepped back. Someone whispered, "Is it dangerous?" Another person pulled out a phone and started recording. Marcus spoke slowly. "Officer Miller, you should put that down and contact your chain of command." Todd smiled. "Oh, now you want to tell me how to do my job?" "No, I'm giving you a chance to do it correctly." The words sat between them. Todd reached for his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller at Lane 4. I need airport police response. Possible security concern. Passenger uncooperative. Unknown device located during secondary screening." His voice was loud enough for the line, the nearby agents, and half the checkpoint to hear. He wanted witnesses now. He wanted uniforms. He wanted Marcus surrounded. The dispatcher responded through static. "Units are on the way." Todd clipped the radio back and looked at Marcus. "Big mistake, buddy." Marcus did not answer. He looked at the torn bag again. He looked at Sarah. Then he waited. The first sounds of the response team arrived before the officers did. Boots, radios, utility belts. The crowd pulled back from the lane, forming a wide circle around the screening area. 3 Port Authority police officers moved in quickly, led by Captain David Reynolds, a seasoned officer with silver at his temples and the controlled expression of someone who had handled real emergencies and did not enjoy theater. Captain Reynolds had spent 27 years in airport policing. He had seen real threats, false alarms, medical emergencies, family disputes, lost children, and frightened travelers who simply did not understand the rules. He respected security work when it was done well. He also knew the danger of officers who enjoyed escalation. Real professionals calm a room when they enter it. Todd had done the opposite. The captain could feel it as soon as he arrived. The crowd was not just afraid of the device on the table. They were afraid of Todd. When Reynolds recognized Marcus, the memory arrived with almost physical force. A briefing packet from 3 days earlier, new department leadership, cabinet-level travel protocols, secure communication device identification. The face in the photograph had worn a suit. The man in front of him wore a hoodie, but the eyes were the same, and the phone in Todd's hand removed every possible doubt. For one brief second, Reynolds felt the full danger of what almost happened. If he had trusted Todd's account without looking closely, if he had rushed, if he had let the loudest voice define the truth, he could have placed cuffs on the very official responsible for the agency itself. Worse than that, he could have helped punish an innocent traveler. The title made the mistake visible. The principle was larger. Every person deserved that second look. Todd stepped forward before the captain could ask a question. "Captain, glad you're here. This individual refused instructions, became confrontational during screening, and was found carrying a suspicious modified device. I need him restrained and removed from my checkpoint." Sarah's face tightened. That was not what happened, not the way Todd said it. But the words had already left his mouth, and armed officers were now listening. Captain Reynolds looked at Todd, then at Marcus. His eyes narrowed. At first, he saw what Todd wanted him to see. A man in a faded hoodie, old shoes, a torn bag, scattered belongings, a black device on the table. Then he looked again. The captain did not salute right away. He was too experienced for theater and too careful to let a loud officer write the whole story for him. He looked at the secure phone. He looked at the dented laptop. He looked at the torn canvas bag. Then he looked at Marcus's face. Something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, but every trained officer nearby felt it. His shoulders squared. His face lost color. His right hand, which had been near his cuffs, slowly moved away. He had seen Marcus before, not in person, but in briefings, official photographs, security memos, cabinet-level protection notices. He recognized the eyes first, then the stillness, then the secure phone sitting on the table. Still, he checked himself because a professional does not build a decision on panic or pride. Captain Reynolds lowered his voice. "Sir, may I confirm your name?" Marcus reached into the bin, took out his identification wallet, and placed it open on the steel table. He did not push it forward. He did not announce himself. He simply let the captain read. For one awkward second, the only sound was the belt moving behind the closed lane. Captain Reynolds looked at the identification. Then he looked back at Marcus. "Mr. Secretary," he said. 2 words, spoken clearly. The terminal seemed to inhale all at once. Todd blinked. "What did you say?" Captain Reynolds ignored him. He brought his feet together and straightened. The officers behind him did the same. The captain gave a crisp, respectful salute, not as a performance for the cameras, but because procedure had finally caught up with the truth. "Mr. Secretary, the Port Authority Police are ready to assist." The words moved through the crowd in whispers. "Mr. Secretary. Secretary of what? Department of Homeland Security? That's him? That's really him." Todd's hand lowered. The black phone felt suddenly much heavier. He looked from the captain to Marcus, then to the ruined bag, then to Sarah, then back to Marcus. His face changed as understanding arrived too late. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Officer Miller, place the government device on the table." Marcus did not enjoy relieving Todd of duty in front of a crowd. That was important, though most people watching did not understand it. He was not interested in revenge. Revenge would have made the scene loud, messy, and satisfying for the wrong reasons. He wanted accountability to look exactly like what it was supposed to be. Clear, documented, proportional, impossible to mistake for personal anger. That was why he asked for the badge first, not to humiliate Todd, but to separate a broken trust from the public it had harmed. The badge was never Todd's private crown. It belonged to the people. It belonged to the woman with the small bottle, to Sarah at the monitor, to the children waiting barefoot by the bins, to the travelers who had no choice but to believe the system would not abuse their compliance. As the items gathered on the table, Marcus watched Todd finally understand the difference between having power and being trusted with it. That difference is everything. Power can be handed over in a uniform, a keycard, a radio, a title. Trust has to be earned every hour, especially when the person in front of you is tired, nervous, or unable to defend himself. Todd swallowed. "Mr. Secretary, I didn't know." "Place it on the table." Todd obeyed. His hand trembled as he set the phone down. "Now remove your badge." Todd stared at him. Marcus repeated the order, quietly. "Remove your badge." The metal shield on Todd's chest seemed to grow heavier. A few minutes earlier, it had given him posture, volume, and nerve. Now it was only a piece of metal representing trust he had broken in front of everyone. Todd unclipped it and placed it on the steel table. "Your clearance card." Todd pulled the card from his pocket and set it beside the badge. "Your radio." Todd removed the shoulder radio, his fingers clumsy. "Your access keys." The keys hit the table with a sharp clatter. Marcus looked at the small pile. Badge, card, radio, keys. The tools of authority stripped down to objects. "You are relieved of duty," Marcus said, "effective immediately." Todd found his voice, but it came out thin. "Sir, this was a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus said. "A misunderstanding is when a traveler forgets to remove a belt. A misunderstanding is when a bottle is too large and someone needs the rule explained. What happened here was not confusion. It was a choice." Todd's lips moved, but no words came. Marcus stepped closer. "You chose to mock an elderly woman. You chose to threaten a new officer for speaking up. You chose to damage passenger property. You chose to cut open a family keepsake after I explained what it was. And then you chose to describe a secure government phone in a way that caused fear across a crowded terminal." Todd's face flushed dark red. Marcus kept his voice calm. "You were not protecting this airport. You were protecting your ego." The crowd was silent now, but the silence had changed. It was no longer fear. It was attention. Marcus looked around at the travelers, then back at Todd. "Every person in this line has rights. Every person in this building has dignity. A uniform does not erase that. A badge does not place you above the people you swore to serve. If you cannot tell the difference between authority and intimidation, you cannot hold federal authority." Todd whispered, "I'm sorry." Marcus studied him. I believe you're sorry that I am the Secretary of Homeland Security. I do not know if you're sorry for the woman whose property you threw away. I do not know if you're sorry for Officer Jenkins, whom you threatened. I do not know if you're sorry for the travelers you've treated this way when nobody important was watching. That is what this investigation will determine." The word investigation landed harder than shouting would have. Marcus turned to Captain Reynolds. "Captain, please escort Mr. Miller out of the secure area. He is no longer authorized to remain at this checkpoint. Preserve all recordings, radio logs, body camera footage, and terminal surveillance from Lane 4. No footage is to be deleted, altered, or withheld." "Yes, Mr. Secretary," the captain said. Two officers stepped beside Todd. They did not shove him. They did not embarrass him for sport. They simply made it clear that the choice was over. Todd looked once at Sarah, maybe hoping for sympathy. She looked back with tears in her eyes, not because she felt sorry for him, but because her body had not yet caught up to the fact that she was safe. The walk to the exit was long. Todd passed the same passengers he had tried to impress. No one cheered. No one clapped. That made the walk feel longer. People only watched. Phones recorded. Suitcases stood still. His boots sounded hollow against the floor. At the glass doors, he turned once. Lane 4 was already being held by another officer. The line had not collapsed without him. The airport had not needed his cruelty to function. The doors slid open, then shut behind him. Inside, Marcus turned away from the exit. He gave Todd no more attention. He walked back to this table and looked at the torn duffel. The canvas sagged open. His shirts were scattered. The photograph of his father lay near the leg of the table, face up, one corner touching the floor. For the first time all morning, Marcus knelt. The Secretary of Homeland Security lowered himself onto the hard airport tile and began picking up his belongings one by one. He lifted the photograph first. His thumb brushed dust from the glass, then the shaving kit, then the paperback, then the folded shirts. After Todd was escorted out, the checkpoint did not burst into celebration. Real relief rarely looks neat. People exhaled. A few wiped their eyes. Someone quietly asked if the elderly woman was all right. The father with the tired child bent down and retied his daughter's shoe. The student with the headphones removed them and stared at the floor. The whole room had been reminded how quickly an ordinary morning can turn when the wrong person enjoys authority too much. Then, slowly, people began helping. It started badly, like most honest things do. One man bent down, then stood up too fast, unsure if he was allowed to touch anything. A woman asked, "Is this yours?" even though everyone knew it was. The businessman who had bumped Marcus earlier picked up the paperback book and held it out with both hands. "I'm sorry," he said. Marcus accepted the book and nodded. A mother retrieved one of the folded shirts from beside the barrier. Another traveler picked up the shaving kit. Nobody made a speech. Nobody tried to become the hero of the moment. They simply helped gather what had been scattered. Marcus appreciated that more than applause. A crowd can turn fast when power changes sides. Help after the fact is not the same as courage before the damage is done, but it is still a beginning. He knew some of those people would replay the morning later and ask themselves why they had waited so long. That question, if they let it work on them, could make them better. Sarah stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Secretary, please let me help." Marcus raised one hand gently, not to stop her like Todd had stopped her, to slow her down. "You don't have to clean up his choices, Officer Jenkins." Her eyes filled. The kindness almost made it harder. Anger, she could understand. A reprimand she had prepared for. This quiet mercy left her with nowhere to hide from herself. "I should have done more." Marcus stood and looked at her name tag. "Sarah Jenkins." "You tried," he said. "I stopped." "You were threatened by a senior officer." "I still stopped." Marcus softened his voice. "Fear is real, Sarah, especially when the person doing wrong can affect your schedule, your paycheck, your future. I'm not going to pretend courage is easy just because people like to make speeches about it, but I heard you speak up twice. That matters." A tear slipped down her cheek. Marcus placed the damaged laptop into the torn bag. Then he looked at the rookie pin on her lapel. "Do you know why I came through this checkpoint dressed like this?" Sarah shook her head. "Because I needed to know what happens when no one thinks power is in the room." She looked at the floor. Marcus continued, "And I learned two things. I learned that the problem is worse than the report suggested. I also learned that there are people inside this system, who still know the difference between policy and cruelty." Sarah looked up. "That includes you." Her face crumpled, but she held herself together. Marcus turned to Captain Reynolds. "I want Officer Jenkins removed from this lane for the rest of the day. Not disciplined, protected. She will provide a statement directly to my office. Her probationary status is not to be used against her for telling the truth." "Yes, Mr. Secretary." Then Marcus looked at Sarah again. "After today, there will be a review team, independent oversight, passenger treatment, civil rights, officer conduct. I will need people who understand the pressure from the inside, people who know what it feels like to be told silence is part of the job." Sarah could barely speak. "Are you saying you want me on that team?" "I'm saying you earned the right to be considered, and I'm saying no one should ever have to choose between a paycheck and basic decency." Sarah covered her mouth. "Thank you, sir." Marcus nodded. "Thank me by telling the truth clearly." She did. Within hours, the videos from Lane 4 spread across the country. 3 angles from 3 passengers showed the same story. Todd humiliating the elderly woman. Todd threatening Sarah. Todd slamming the laptop. Todd cutting the canvas bag. Todd raising the secure phone as if fear were a tool he could use. Then Captain Reynolds saluting the man in the faded hoodie. The public reaction came fast. The first wave of public comments was angry, but the more important messages came later, after the noise faded. A retired teacher wrote that she had stopped flying because the checkpoint made her feel helpless after her husband died. A nurse wrote that she had watched a patient with a medical device treated harshly and had not known who to call. A father wrote about his teenage son, who still got nervous in airports years after one rough inspection. None of those stories made front-page news by themselves. Together, they formed a picture Marcus could not ignore. He asked his staff to bring him a sample of the letters every Friday. Not summaries, not charts, the letters themselves. He wanted handwriting, grammar mistakes, frustration, gratitude, all of it. Government can become numb when pain arrives only as data. Marcus did not want numbness anywhere near this reform. One letter came from the elderly woman in Lane 4. Her English was careful and simple. She wrote that she had felt ashamed when everyone watched her lose the small bottle of cream her daughter had bought for her. She wrote that Sarah's quiet words had helped her breathe. She wrote that she did not want the officer hated forever, but she wanted people like him stopped before they hurt someone with less strength. Marcus read that sentence twice. It was fairer than many people would have been. It reminded him that justice does not have to be cruel to be strong. Travelers shared their own stories. Some were small but painful. A lost item mocked. A question answered with a threat. A parent rushed while trying to help a child. A traveler with limited English treated like a problem instead of a person. Some stories were old. Some had happened that very week. For years, people had thought their experience was isolated. Now they saw the pattern. Marcus did not celebrate the attention. He did not give dramatic interviews. He did not sit in front of cameras and turn the moment into a victory lap. He returned to Washington with the torn bag beside him and the audits open on his desk. In Washington, the reform work was slower than the video made it seem. Online, people wanted one villain and one clean ending. Marcus knew better. Todd mattered, but Todd was not the whole problem. For years, complaints had been softened, delayed, misplaced, or answered with form letters. Some supervisors had protected their friends. Some had feared bad publicity. Some had convinced themselves that stressed travelers exaggerated. The result was a culture where officers like Todd learned they could keep pushing as long as they chose the right targets. Marcus ordered the review team to study not only the worst incidents, but the quiet ones. The moments when passengers were mocked for asking for help. The moments when elderly travelers were rushed into panic. The moments when a person with limited English was treated as suspicious because understanding took extra time. The moments when employees tried to report misconduct and were told to be team players. He did not ask for a glossy reform brochure. He asked for names, dates, complaint paths, supervisory decisions, training gaps, and disciplinary outcomes. He wanted to know where responsibility had vanished. Every system has places where truth gets lost. Marcus wanted those places named. Sarah's work became central to that effort because she understood the small pressures. She explained how a new officer might see misconduct but not know who could be trusted. She explained how probationary employees were sometimes trained unofficially to imitate the harshest voices because harshness looked like confidence. She explained how travelers often obeyed unreasonable instructions because they feared missing flights, losing money, or being labeled difficult. Her testimony changed the language of the new training. It made the reforms human instead of theoretical. The new policy required officers to explain secondary screening in plain language whenever possible. It required supervisors to document property handling and damage claims immediately. It created a clear rule that passenger questions, asked respectfully, could not be treated as misconduct. It strengthened protections for employees who reported abuse. It required review of repeated complaints tied to the same officer or lane. It also added something Marcus insisted on personally. Every training class began with a simple sentence: "Security without dignity is not service." Some people called the sentence sentimental. Marcus let them. He had learned from his father that people often mock simple truths because simple truths leave them nowhere to hide. The next morning, he called a meeting before sunrise. The room filled with senior officials, legal advisors, training directors, regional supervisors, and people who had spent years saying change was complicated. Marcus placed the torn duffel on the table where everyone could see it. The split canvas lay open like evidence. For a full minute, he said nothing. Then he asked, "How many complaints did it take before we believed the public?" No one answered. He opened the first folder, then the second, then the third. This one describes an officer taking a passenger's medication and laughing when she cried. This one describes a supervisor ignoring repeated reports about the same lane. This one describes passengers being pulled aside more often because of how they looked, how they dressed, how they spoke, or how nervous they appeared. This one describes a rookie employee afraid to report misconduct because she expected retaliation. He looked around the table. We do not have a public relations problem. We have a trust problem, and trust is not repaired with slogans. Over the next week, the department began its largest passenger treatment review in decades. Marcus ordered independent auditors into major airports across the country. Complaint channels were moved outside local supervisory chains. Officers could report misconduct without sending the report through the person they feared. Passengers were given a direct way to document abuse, disrespect, and retaliation. Training was rewritten to focus not only on prohibited items, but on dignity, communication, bias, escalation, and the difference between lawful authority and personal power. Not everyone liked it. Some supervisors complained privately that morale would suffer. Marcus asked whose morale they meant: the officers who served honorably, or the ones who missed being untouchable. Some officials warned that reform would take time. Marcus agreed. Then he told them time was not an excuse to move slowly on what was already obvious. Some people said Todd Miller was just one bad officer. Marcus pointed to the complaints and said, "One bad officer can only repeat the same behavior for years when the system around him learns to look away." Sarah also had to learn what courage felt like after the crisis passed. At first, everyone praised her. Then the work became ordinary again. Reports, meetings, hard conversations, officers who felt accused, managers who smiled in public and resisted in private. Some days she wondered if one video could really change anything. On those days, Marcus reminded her that reform is not a lightning strike. It is carpentry. Measure, cut, sand, repair. Do it again tomorrow. There were days when she still heard Todd's voice in her memory, telling her to stay quiet. The voice showed up when she prepared to challenge a senior manager or when she had to write a report that might make powerful people uncomfortable. But each time she spoke anyway, the voice got smaller. That was how she measured her own growth, not by how fearless she felt, but by how often fear failed to stop her. One afternoon, Sarah called her mother from a bench outside the department building. She told her about the new office, the long hours, and the training changes. Her mother listened, then said, "I took that picture of you in your uniform because I was proud you got the job. Now I'm proud because you know what the job is for." Sarah cried then quietly, with the phone pressed to her ear and traffic moving past on the avenue. Not because everything was fixed, because she finally believed she had a place inside the fixing. Sarah Jenkins gave her statement 2 days later. Her hands shook when she entered the room, but her voice grew steadier as she spoke. She described the elderly woman, the bottle, the threat, the laptop, the cutter, the phone. She described her own fear honestly. She did not make herself sound braver than she had been. That made Marcus trust her more. When she finished, he said, "That's the kind of truth we can build on." A month later, Sarah was reassigned to the new Passenger Accountability Office in Washington. She did not become famous. She did not want to. She worked long days reviewing reports, identifying patterns, and helping design training for officers who would stand where she once stood. She understood the pressure in those lanes. She knew how fear traveled through a workplace. She knew how a bully could turn policy into a weapon and make everyone around him feel responsible for staying quiet. That made her valuable. Todd's case moved through official channels without drama. There were interviews, statements, footage reviews, and legal findings. Marcus made sure it stayed professional. He did not want a public spectacle to replace due process. Todd had denied that dignity to others. Marcus would not repeat the same failure in reverse. The evidence was clear. The badge remained off. His federal service ended. Other supervisors tied to repeated failures were reviewed as well. Some were removed. Some were retrained. Some, to their credit, admitted they had tolerated behavior they should have challenged sooner. Marcus accepted honest accountability when it came with action. He had no interest in empty apologies. That distinction mattered. The goal was not to create a new culture of fear. It was to create a culture of responsibility. Fear makes people hide mistakes. Responsibility makes people correct them. Fear makes employees protect themselves. Responsibility teaches them to protect the public. Marcus wanted every officer to understand that firmness and kindness were not enemies. You could enforce rules without taking pleasure in someone's discomfort. You could keep a checkpoint secure without stripping away a traveler's sense of worth. Back at John Fitzgerald Kennedy International Airport, Lane 4 changed too. Not magically, not perfectly. Airports do not become gentle overnight. Lines were still long. Passengers still forgot to empty pockets. Babies still cried. Coffee still spilled. People still got frustrated. But something had shifted. The elderly woman from that morning received an apology and reimbursement for her confiscated item. More importantly, she received a phone call from someone who listened without rushing her. She told the caller that the bottle did not matter nearly as much as being made to feel foolish in front of strangers. That sentence went into the new training manual. The replacement supervisor at Lane 4 began each shift by reminding officers that screening was not theater. No mocking, no public shaming, no punishment for questions asked in good faith. If secondary screening was needed, it would be done cleanly, clearly, and with respect. Some officers rolled their eyes at first. Then the complaint numbers started falling. Passenger cooperation improved. Arguments decreased. The line moved better, not worse. It turned out dignity did not slow security down. Cruelty did. Months later, Marcus returned to the same terminal without warning. This time, he did not wear the faded hoodie. He wore a dark suit, but he carried the torn duffel anyway. The seam was still open. The leather strap was still damaged. He had placed a simple cloth lining inside so nothing would fall out, but he had not repaired the tear. The security line was busy. A family ahead of him was confused about a stroller. An officer bent down, explained the process, and helped them fold it. An elderly man asked twice whether he needed to remove his shoes. The officer answered twice with the same patience, both times. A student forgot a water bottle in her backpack and looked terrified when it was found. The supervisor smiled and said, "Happens all day. We'll take care of it." Marcus watched carefully. The work was still the work. Rules were still rules. Bags were still opened. Items were still removed. But the tone had changed. The line did not feel gentle exactly. It was still an airport. People were still late. Shoes still came off. Bins still stacked up. But it felt professional. That was all Marcus had ever wanted. Fair, firm when needed, and human all the time. Sarah saw him from the supervisor desk before he reached the table. Her new badge was gold. Her posture was different now, not arrogant, grounded. She walked over and greeted him quietly. "Good morning, Mr. Secretary." "Good morning, Supervisor Jenkins." She smiled at that. It still sounded new. He placed the duffel in the bin. She looked at the tear, then back at him. "Still haven't repaired it." "No," Marcus said. "It keeps me honest." Sarah nodded. Then she did something that stayed with him. She turned to the officer working the lane and said, "Handle this one with care. It carries history." The young officer did not roll his eyes. He did not make a joke. He nodded and placed both hands under the bag before moving it forward. Marcus thought of his father then, Raymond Vance, standing in a grainy photograph beside a transport plane. "Bring yourself home with honor." Marcus looked at the young officer, at Sarah, at the line moving steadily behind them, and felt for the first time in months that the sentence had found its way into the room. He also wrote one sentence on a card and kept it over under the glass on his desk. Never let efficiency become an excuse for forgetting the person standing right in front of you every day. Marcus kept the ruined duffel in his office. His staff offered to have it repaired more than once. A professional restoration company even volunteered to rebuild the canvas, replace the leather, and polish the brass until the bag looked nearly new. Marcus said no. He kept it exactly as it was, torn seam and all, on a low shelf across from his desk. Every morning, when he entered the office, he saw it before he saw the seal on the wall. It reminded him that power can make a person forget the ground beneath his feet. It reminded him that policy touches real hands, real families, real memories. It reminded him that a man in a hoodie should not need to be a cabinet secretary to be treated with care. One evening, weeks after the incident, Marcus stayed late in the office. The building had gone quiet. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. He opened the duffel and took out the old photograph of his father. His father had been younger than Marcus in the picture, leaner, sunburned, one hand resting on the same bag. On the back, in faded blue ink, he had written, "Bring yourself home with honor." Marcus read the words twice. Then he placed the photograph beside the torn canvas and sat for a long time. The story of Lane 4 spread farther than Marcus expected, but the lesson was never really about one powerful man revealing who he was. That was the part people shared first, because it was dramatic. The real lesson came later, when everyone had to ask a quieter question. How do we treat people when we think they cannot help us, hurt us, reward us, or embarrass us? Todd saw a faded hoodie and decided Marcus was beneath him. He saw an old bag and decided it was worthless. He saw a young officer with student debt and decided her fear could be used against her. He saw an elderly woman with an accent and decided embarrassment was easier than patience. In each moment, he made a choice. That is what the badge never hid. Not really. Most harm does not begin with a dramatic act. It begins with a small decision to stop seeing someone fully. A tired traveler becomes a delay. A nervous student becomes an annoyance. A person with an accent becomes a joke. A quiet man becomes a target. When that happens enough times, cruelty starts looking normal to the people who practice it. But kindness begins the same way, in small choices. Sarah's voice was not loud. She did not give a speech. She did not save the day all at once. She simply said, "Be careful with that property." She said, "The bottle is under the limit." She said enough to remind the room that someone still knew right from wrong. That mattered. It mattered before she was rewarded. It mattered when she was afraid. It mattered when nobody powerful had yet stepped forward. We often imagine courage as something grand and fearless. In real life, it usually feels smaller than that. It can be one careful sentence spoken with a shaking voice. It can be a hand raised just enough to say, "Wait, that isn't right." It can be asking someone if they are okay after everyone else has moved on. It can be telling the whole story, even the part that makes us uncomfortable. Respect should not wait for proof of status. A person should not have to be important before we treat them as human. The traveler in the worn hoodie, the mother with the stroller, the student with the backpack, the elder with the accent, the worker behind the monitor, all of them carry a life the rest of us cannot see. And every day, in ordinary places like airports, offices, stores, schools, and hallways, we get a chance to protect that dignity in small ways. Sometimes responsibility means admitting we stayed quiet longer than we should have. Sometimes forgiveness means letting people grow after they have failed, without pretending the failure did not matter. Sometimes justice means fixing the pattern, not just blaming the person who got caught. And sometimes kindness is as simple as slowing down long enough to remember that the person in front of us is not in the way. They are someone with a whole life behind their eyes. Marcus never repaired the old duffel bag because the tear told the truth. It showed what happens when authority forgets compassion. It also showed what can happen when one person, then another, and then an entire room finally decides to see clearly. The bag remained torn, but people stopped being quiet around it. That was the change that mattered.